Turn this on, and in terms of events, we've had actors, criminals, Academy Award nominated directors, CIA agents, but never ever a shipwright, somebody who builds ships. Will Sofrin is a master shipwright who has taught naval architecture at MIT, which I heard is a pretty good school, and has built boats for Billy Joel and Estee Lauder. As a professional sailor and licensed captain, he has tracked more than 30,000 blue water miles. In 2014, he relocated to Los Angeles and launched a design firm that specializes in luxury residential development. He continues to race sailboats and explores the coast of California with his wife and 6-year-old daughter. This is his first book. The book, All Hands on Deck, a modern-day high-seas adventure to the far side of the world. He's going to talk about that tonight. Please welcome Santa Barbara's newest author resident, Will Sofrin.
Hey there.
Well, Will, welcome to Santa Barbara, and I just wanted to know,
Thanks
did you
for
always?
having me.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Did you always want to live in Santa Barbara, or you had an inkling for a little while?
Well, I after arriving in San Diego from the journey of this book, how many people have read the book so far? Right, a lot of people. So there's a romance I have in the book with a woman named Miriam, and her sister lived up here. So after arriving for a few days, we came up to Santa Barbara for a short vacation, and boy, I just felt cheated in life when I saw where you all live. I thought, boy, had I known that a place like this really existed, I probably would have worked a lot harder in high school to get better grades. So I was very moved by Santa Barbara, and I wanted to. I've always wanted to come back. So my wife, who's not Miriam, and myself, we had our first date in New York City. I want to say 12 years ago, and on our first day, we were talking about where we wanted to end up. And I told her that story, and then she told me how her mom had gone to grad school in Carpinteria, and she had visited her mom when she was going to grad school in Carpinteria, and came out and had the same impression. She thought, wow, I've been cheated in life also. And so she's from Ithaca, and I'm from upstate Connecticut. And so we said, we're going to move to Santa Barbara. So at that time, we were living in New York City, and my wife is a pediatrician, and she got placed at CHLA, and we thought, great, that gets us across the country. And then I have been grinding away, working to build my business up here for the last 8 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm so happy to say that finally we were able to pull the trigger, and we just bought a house on Grand Avenue in the Lower Riviera. And we couldn't be more happy to see such a big dream come true, be part of this community.
Wow, that's great.
Good for you.
Hope you don't mind my very long-winded answers.
No, that's great. Let's jump back before that, as far as when you were young, in terms of when did the sea really call to you?
Well, I always loved the ocean. I don't know why. It's just something that has certainly called to me. I remember maybe it was because I was landlocked in Connecticut, and it would take an hour and a half to get anywhere to the coast, but just the smell of the air. And I remember being a kid and seeing sailboats, and we would go to this little island called Block Island. There's a lot of people know about Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, and Block Island sort of like the redheaded stepchild, which is my favorite because it's kind of like Jaws. It didn't get caught up in becoming this socialite community, and so it's kind of like going back to Amity. And I just remember riding the ferry and seeing the sailboats and walking the docks, and I'd certainly always been a person who, when I set my mind to something, I do it, and I wanted to learn how to sail, and I did that, and it just, everything about it just continued to pull me along and steer me.
Well, you said your ancestors date back to this country, 1600, 1700. Were any of them seaworthy?
I wouldn't say, so seaworthy. I did have a famous ancestor named Charles Sumner. There's a statue of him in Boston Common.
Yeah.
I've got a book that he helped, I think, write that had to do with celestial navigation and stuff. So, but no, I am the anomaly of my family for the most part, where nobody's really done. But now that I've gone and done all this, well, now my sister and her husband have bought a sailboat, and then his brother went and bought a sailboat this year. So everyone's kind of joining the bandwagon and doing the sailing thing, which is a very expensive habit to start.
Found that out.
It's great though, because you don't have money for drugs if you've got a boat.
So you're starting a future generations of the Sofrin family of sailors. It's really interesting. You know, when you're in college, obviously this interested you, but did you have an idea that you could make a career out of building boats?
Well, not to correct you, but
Okay.
I didn't go to college. Straight out of high school, I did an apprenticeship
Oh, wow.
to learn how to build wooden boats. And I'd love to go to college. It probably won't be something I'll do till I retire. I think continued education is wonderful, and I hope to never stop learning. But that is something on my list, is to get a college degree. It's something
Well,
I haven't pursued.
I'm stopping you here because you taught at MIT
I did.
without a degree.
That's correct.
How the
wondered the
heck
same
did that happen?
Yeah. So there's a really famous naval architect named Nathaniel Herreshoff, and he's best known for, you've got these giant black and white photos of all these huge America's Cup boats at the turn of the 20th century.
His grandfather.
And he did these. He was just really this incredible designer. Even worked with Teddy Roosevelt on sort of relaunching the American Navy and reprioritizing it, and so they had a great relationship. And the thing about Nat Herreshoff was he was a very efficient man, and so what he would do is he would carve these models for his design, and then he designed a machine and had someone build it for him where he would measure the offsets of the dimensions of these models, and then they would scale that up and build a ship. And so traditionally, during the 20th century, we went from model making as a source of boat design and construction to developing two-dimensional drawings called lines plans, where they show three different views that represent the three-dimensional shape and contour of the vessel. And so Nat Herreshoff never had to do those drawings because he had already developed the shape of the model, so it was proven correct as a shape. And so MIT owns all of his designs, and I had done an internship there when I was doing my wooden boat building apprenticeship, and I was told that I could come back anytime I wanted afterwards and sort of play and draw. There was a suggestion of me maybe drawing some of his designs because they didn't exist. And so after sailing for about 10 years, I got the itch to do more with my life, and I wanted to exit out of sailing as a living. And so I had, while I was figuring out what I was going to do, I reached back out and asked, you guys had offered for me to do some of these drawings. Can I do them? And I had to jump through a bunch of hoops and hurdles to show I could do it. And then it was going to be this, we launched this limited edition art project where I developed all these big plans, and we even focused on designs that there was no visual representation anymore, like no photographs, no construction drawings. And after working on it for a couple of years, I was asked if I would like to teach a course about what I do. And so I wrote a syllabus and I taught a course, and I got really lucky because that very first class I taught, which was very stumbly for me, the commanding officer for the Navy, who was at MIT, MIT is a naval station as well, he happened to take my class, and he loved it, and so he encouraged that it become accredited. And then I ended up teaching it for 10 years, and most of my students were naval officers. And it wasn't for anything other. I was not teaching. It was not like a naval architecture full-on class. What it was traditional techniques in naval architecture, but it was really a thought process course because it was teaching you about how to think three-dimensionally and visualize that. And through the process, if you cut corners, you would never be able to achieve the final goal. You really had to follow the steps. And it's very interesting because no matter, you're at the school of the smartest people in the world, many of the smartest people in the world, and not all. And there are lots of wonderful schools with many smart people.
Yeah.
I'd always start at the class saying, after a couple of years, I learned that about 20% of the class would fly through this, do extremely well. And then, you know, let's say maybe like 50% of the class would be able to do it. And then the rest, that left 30%, no matter how hard they worked, they just lacked the capacity to think three-dimensionally, and they could not complete the project.
Interesting.
So, and it was no fault of their own, it was just how we're wired. That's it.
You know, I have to contest one thing you said. You said you're very lucky. I think Branch Rickey, the baseball great who called up Jackie Robinson, said luck is the residue of design. I think that had more to do with you than, I mean, maybe the timing, but I think with the luck and the way your thought process is, and I'm going to ask you this question, then we'll go into the book, is watching you think differently and how you approach. And I was just wondering if you can go into a little bit of how your mind works when you're creating something.
Well,
That's beautiful.
Well, for one,
Just a little bit. Yeah.
I always like to say you can't win a race if you're following the leader, right? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Well,
So-
I take a little issue with that.
I'm a person who runs toward problems. I think problems are opportunities. So when something is really difficult, I kind of want to be the first person to raise my hand, because I'm pretty sure that most people will go for the easiest thing. I think one of the best skill sets I ever learned when I was doing my wooden boat building apprenticeship was, it wasn't the skills I learned, it was learning how to learn, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think having that desire and that capacity to say, you know, here is something I don't understand, but I believe I've got the mechanics to figure out how to figure out how to understand that, and then work through it. And I think that involves being, even though if my wife is here, she'd say he's pretty arrogant. But I think it's more about being humble and honest about saying, you know, I don't know this, and asking for help, and trying to study and learn from the people around you, and then figuring out the way to do it.
Yeah. Which brings us jumping ahead to All Hands on Deck, and as far as writing this book, and if you could talk briefly about your experience, and then maybe I could enlist some help here and questions from the audience about the book. So if you talk a little bit, synopsize the book a little bit, and
Well, do you guys want to hear about the writing process, or do you want to hear about the book synopsis? What would you like to hear about?
How about a little of both, mostly the latter?
Well, I'll start off with, writing the book was, one of the hardest experiences in my life, and it's exactly what I was talking about right now, because I didn't go to college, and 20 years ago I didn't set out to say I was going to be an author. In fact, 5 years ago I didn't think that I'd be sitting here as a published author. But I decided I wanted to write a book, and I absolutely went about it almost every which way wrong. I mean, I did, because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. So I thought, okay, well, I started by reaching out to the captain of the ship and told him I wanted to do this, and he had the ship's logbook, and fortunately for me, he was coming out to California a week after I'd reached out to him. So I met him in Oxnard because he was filling in on an atoll ship there, and I showed up with 2 big bags of dark and stormy rum and ginger beer, and everything to bribe him and the crew on the boat to see if they would help me with my efforts. And as I'm sure a lot of people know, the world is filled with people who say, I'm going to write a book. So I can't tell you how many, oh yeah, you're going to write a book. All right, that's great. Okay, but fortunately I did get a lot of help. So Captain Bailey brought the ship's logbook, which I took photographs of. And a log is something where when you're underway, you record on a regular basis at certain intervals. It depends on the vessel or the situation that you're in, but in this case, every hour we were recording the weather conditions, where we were, what was going on, and any sort of extreme events. And that provided this incredible backbone for me to say, here is a timeline from A to B that is legal record. And it really provided the foundation I needed to make sure that I didn't meander too far with sort of, because you know, as I was reminded when I called up, there's a girl in this book that I have a romantic relationship with, and her name is Miriam, and we had a very fiery breakup after an intense romantic experience, and it didn't end well. So we didn't speak for, let's say, 17 years. But I mean, can you imagine like your ex-boyfriend calling you up, who you haven't spoken to, saying, "I'm gonna write a book about falling in love and sailing to California."
Oh my word.
And I mean, I didn't say I was gonna write about falling in love, but it, like the timing of it was like about when we had this happen. And she is now an attorney, and she said, "Well, let's be clear, Will. This is going to be about your version of what happened. It doesn't really mean it's what happened." And I said, "Oh, that's the lawyer in you talking right now, isn't it?" But you know, it took a little while to get her to come on board, but she did, and she was a wonderful resource. And I have to say, like, one of my favorite things about writing this book was not just the reconnecting with everyone, but I don't know, like, I can't think of, to me it was so crazy to get to talk to someone who I had such a powerful relationship with, and enough time had gone by where we were more mature now, where we were able to actually have these really nice conversations about what it was like to fall in love. And I don't know, I thought that was a really beautiful opportunity. Not something that I can say has ever happened with anyone else, and I tried to go down my list of exes and go, no, I would not want to have that conversation with her. No, I would not. But you know, that was just so special, I think.
You wanted to write the book, but what really inspired you? What really got your butt in the chair to actually write the book?
Well, I got a daughter who's very precocious, very difficult. It is like looking at myself in a mirror. And
For better or worse.
Yeah, right. It's sort of like, oh, I know it's coming, but then for me, I go, oh, but I know it's coming. I know what to do. My wife is a pediatrician and did 2 fellowships, and we have a wall of diplomas of all these Ivy League schools. And I did a boat building apprenticeship, and we both lead successful lives today. And I'm concerned that going to college is overprescribed in America. I think continued education is imperative, but I don't think everyone, and I think there are too many kids that are peer pressured through society to go out, and they take on this debt, and they make these mistakes, and it's not, I don't think, you know, those first 4 years after high school have to be forever what defines you as a person, or what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So I hope that my daughter, when she is in high school, will see how both my wife and myself have been successful, and maybe she'll read an adventure story like this. She doesn't need to do what I did, but just find something that like inspires passion her, because I would really like to support her whichever way she wants to go. That's right for her, but I don't want her to feel pressure that there is only one way to be successful.
Interesting. Now about the book, if you can.
So
take us through a little bit of the journey.
Well, so the book is it's about my experience being hired to sail the American tall ship Rose, which is a replica of a 1757 English frigate, and the ship was acquired by 20th Century Fox to make the movie Master and Commander, starring Russell Crowe. And Peter Weir was the director, and Peter wanted the real thing. He wanted an actual ship, even though they could make anything in Hollywood. He wanted the real ship. He had traveled the world looking for the ship, and he found her and fell in love with her. So that was the condition. He wanted the ship, and 20th Century Fox wanted him for director. So that's where the ship comes in. And the problem is that the ship is on the East Coast, and all filming is going to happen on the West Coast. So therein lies the story, which is we have to get the ship from the East Coast to the West Coast, and that's a 6,000-mile journey. And she's no spring chicken.
Yeah.
She's tired in many ways. I don't think I'd be exaggerating by saying in some ways she was held together by, you know, duct tape and bubble gum. And so the thing is that we depart from Newport, Rhode Island in January, and we sail to California, and we're supposed to go through the Panama Canal, and we end up encountering this horrible weather that we never should have been out in. Hurricane strength storm. So it's not a hurricane, but it's hurricane conditions. And writing the book, I learned that a number of the really experienced shipmates on here, so we had 30 crew, men and women. And about 5 of the really experienced people thought we were all going to die,
Oh,
which is kind of terrifying when you think about it. Unfortunately, I was so naive. I thought, well, this is just wonderful. I'm in this giant storm. I don't get seasick. This is great. But I can't say that for everyone. I mean, some people were just terrified. But I did have one of the scariest moments of my life where the chief mate on the ship. So you have the captain, and then the chief mate is the first officer under the captain. He really took a liking to me, a shining, and sort of my sailing mentor who kind of put me on the boat was his sailing mentor as well. So I was kind of sort of taken in by him a little bit, and I think meant to learn the ropes. And so there's one scene in the book where we're in the middle of that big storm, and one of our sails starts to come unfurled, and he asked me to go aloft with him. And I didn't think twice because I did what I'm supposed to do, and okay, we'll do that. But I didn't want to tell him I had a horrible fear of heights. And what's happening is we've got to go 60 feet up in the air, and it's very different. Like boats today, people don't free climb up in the rig. Everything is set for the deck. And in this though, we had to free climb up in that rig, and you can imagine the mast is going 60 feet. And, 60. The arc was 60 to 80 feet. I think every 6 to 8 seconds or something. But then it's also doing this, and it's going up and down. So you can imagine like you're just getting tossed all around, and it's terrifying. And then we get up there, and that's when he tells me what we're gonna do. Where you've got this giant sail, and just the part of it that's come loose is like the size of a car out there in the parking lot. Imagine that car just slamming up and down. And he says, okay, we're going to jump on it and punch it as hard as we can to try and collapse it. So it's just crazy. But I think we get in. I guess I'm the kind of person that you get there and you've just got to do what you've got to do, and that's it. So we get through the storm, and as a result. The interior of the ship is destroyed, and a lot of people's bunks are wet. We have waves of water inside of the ship. We were taking on so much water that whenever the ship would roll, the pumps weren't able to pump out the water, so water kept accumulating. What would happen is every time the ship would roll, a wave would roll across the interior of the ship and then roll over and strike everything. It was just awful. Fortunately for me, my bunk was in like an area where it kind of like stayed dry, and it afforded me this opportunity to invite one of my crew members, Miriam, to sleep in my bunk with me. And I thought I was doing her a real service by saying that we're on separate watches. You'll only have to sleep 4 hours with me. That's it. We'll sleep. And and she surprisingly said yes. I was very surprised about that. So she was actually a girl who I'd had a crush on for a couple of years, who I'd met earlier.
Okay.
And the story keeps going. I don't know if I should keep going or if you guys want to ask some questions too.
how far are you going to go with it?
Yeah, it depends on how far you want to go
I
with it.
wanted to ask, if I'm remembering correctly, this is when you were ascending, you decided not to use your tether?
Yes.
Because you might get caught, or? So
what happened was, so when you ascended and descended, everything was free climbing. You were not clipped in at all.
What?
So that was all, and you weren't wearing a life jacket because if you went over, there was not going to be any chance of rescuing you.
What year was this?
This was 2002. And so it's very different today. The tall ships community has really, even in the last 20 years, really made a tremendous amount of progression. And not to say that we were careless or carefree when we were sailing 20 years ago. We were using the safety standards of the time at that period, but just so much has happened in the last 20 years. But to answer your question, the next leg of the journey, we were in the middle of the Caribbean Sea on the way to Panama, and we were dismasted, which means our mast had broke. and not all of them because we had all these masts on the ship, and we had to go. Tony charged me to go aloft again with the officers, and why me? I mean, there's so many people on the boat, and I don't know why. I did get to ask Tony why me, like both times when we had those bad moments. Why was I the person that he asked to go up? And he just said it wasn't about opportunity. These weren't moments to give everybody a chance. He said that he just knew that I would do it, and not in a bad way. Like I would be competent and successful, and he wouldn't have to worry about me freezing or being a problem from up aloft. But yeah, when I went up when the mast broke, we were worried that the entire rig was going to go over, and so I didn't want to clip in when I got up there because I was worried that if I was clipped in and the mast did start to go over, I didn't want to be tied to the mast. I wanted to be able to free fall.
Wow. Not only did you have to deal with the challenges of weather and the ship, but the crew, that not everybody really got along. And how did if you can share some stories about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think everyone here knows I'd be a little silly and dishonest if I said everybody got along. It was just great. I mean, you've got 30 men and women living together in these very uncomfortable conditions, very tight conditions, and mind you, there's no separation from living where we're all sleeping in the same bunk area, so everyone's getting dressed around each other, and so it really required decency. And but then we had a mixed batch of personalities. You have in the book I kind of categorize the groups where you have I call the planet tall shippers, these individuals who live and eat and drink tall ship sailing. If they could, they would be alive 200 years ago and sailing the open ocean without plumbing and electricity and miserable and dirty and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there are people who you can buy the soap that smells like tar, and so you smell like tar all the time because that's what the ships smell like, because you would rub tar on all the rigging to protect it from corrosion from the salt. And then there was the rebels, which is ironic because a boat like this is really kind of like it's sort of a rebel in the sailing world on its own, because in the sailing world you go down to the marina here and you've got your beautiful yachts, and we put on khaki shorts and a polo shirt and we have lunch and champagne. But then you have a ship like this where everyone's dirty and covered in tattoos and they've got long hair. It's like the hippie Navy or something like that, right? And so you've got them, but those are the planet tall shippers. So then I identify another group as like the rebels, which I would be a rebel, which is sort of like I'm a rebel of planet tall ships, so I don't want to be that. I want to wear my yachty stuff. And oddly enough, you could say that the captain of the ship was a rebel. Tony, the hero of the book, was a rebel. I was not into it, but then you've also got your floaters, which are the people who somehow are able to be happy with everyone. I wish I could say I was one of those people. That's where my pig-headedness comes in. Just like, so there was one character in the book, his name is Dwight, who really sort of was like my nemesis on the ship. Fortunately, because I was a ship's carpenter, as a shipwright, I had a very special skill set that was very valuable. And so Captain Bailey immediately commandeered me, and I did whatever projects he wanted. Now Dwight was our bosun, so he was the officer of the rig, and his job was to manage the maintenance of the rigging. And so every day you'd have what was called work party, and he would get all the crew and he'd get to tell everyone what to do, and he loved telling people what to do, but he could never tell me what to do. And that really became a thorn in his side. Now, in all honesty, like, I use real names in the book where I can, and I was able to connect with 22 of the 30 crew members, but a few didn't want to talk to me. I get it, because we all can't get along. And some I just couldn't find. I really tried to find them, but anyone who I did not get to talk to, I used a pseudonym for them. And a friend of mine here in Santa Barbara, successful actor, he suggested when I was talking about the pseudonyms, I'm like, I gotta come up with these names. And he said, you gotta think about characters, like Princess Bride. He goes, like, Billy Crystal's character has maybe 2 minutes of screen time, but he's one of the most memorable characters. He goes, you really gotta draw out these personalities. He said, maybe pseudonyms, you can come up with names of characters that make you think of someone. So I don't know if anyone here has watched The Office. Like Scott, and that's where Dwight comes from.
No.
Yeah,
Dwight Schrute?
that is where the name comes from, because I just thought, Dwight is Schrute is very much like the Dwight in this book. He is a person who lives on a beet farm who would love
Yeah.
to live 200 years ago, and he's got his own way of doing everything. He always wants to be in charge, but he's a terrible leader, and that's why he never ascends in the
Oh
office.
my gosh.
And
That's
so,
great.
So I had fun with that. What I can say is that Miriam is not her actual name, because she's a very private individual, and I, as I was after the book was acquired for publishing, we were kind of close to the end, and I reached out to her and said, not to sound arrogant, but I think the book's going to be very successful, and I think that you may want to consider changing your name. And she was very open to that. She was very open that she agreed, because she didn't want any attention from this, because her name is very unique. Her real name is quite unique, and she wanted that privacy and anonymity. So we also kind of had some fun picking her name for this. We both took
Okay.
turns coming up with a list of names, and we came up with this one. But I am happy to say the book is doing great. It's actually
Yeah.
already in its 3rd edition.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, I gotta ask though, Miriam, where'd it come from?
Well, I picked Miriam, and I'm a big fan of Sally Rooney. I don't know if anyone reads Sally
Okay,
Rooney books, but
okay.
she's a very prolific modern Irish author.
Yeah.
And she writes about people so well, and there's a book of hers called Normal People that was made into a series on
Oh,
Hulu.
yeah, yeah.
And if anyone hasn't watched it, the series, the actors are so incredible because they convey so much emotion. The director was great with so few words. I don't know, it takes me back to being 19 and falling in love for the first time when I'm watching it, and you see those uncomfortable moments.
Yeah.
And so the female character in that story is called Miriam, and that's where the name comes
That's
from.
cool. Did Dave or anyone else have any questions? You
I
guys
would
were-
just
okay,
like to
yeah.
comment. You're kind of unlike this like the molded carpenter. The ship you reference cultural icons and film, and all through the book you reference your sense of things or your attributes to films in history and so forth. Now I find that fascinating that you're much broader than the focused shipwright, and you must look at a lot of movies. It must be your generation, that watches television and watches movies and stuff, or absorbs it all.
I think I might be one of those people that you could say maybe I have ADD, but I just have like a big bandwidth, and I really have a hard time turning my brain off. And so for me, I've always found relaxation in watching movies actually late at night, where I can enter this world and just, like, I love going to a movie theater by myself, and it's one of the few times in the day where my brain, I'll forget about what I was thinking about, but otherwise
interesting.
I just sleep maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, and
That's it?
that's all I sleep, and it's just kind of going. Going a little to what you're saying too is, for me, and I don't want to sound too self-righteous, this book is meant to be certainly a social criticism of today. I think that I love John Hughes movies so much. I think that for me, I really identify with his movies greatly, because there's a character in all of his movies that I like to think that if you watch each movie, there might be someone in it that each of us can maybe relate to or find a little comfort in, or discomfort. And John Hughes movies to me were more about like the Breakfast Club. Everyone starts off the detention, and you've got your groups of individuals, right? You've got the geeks, you've got the jock, you've got the preppy girl, you've got the punk, and as they spend time together, their labels and judgments for one another dissolve and disappear. At the end of the movie, it actually, they go back to their normal lives, but the movie ends with them having a greater understanding and respect for the other. And that for me was what I tried to do with this, because I feel that today a lot of younger individuals in our society are very focused on being labeled. Everybody wants a label, and I don't know, I'm a little saddened by that. So it was also meant for me to kind of show how, we had a crew reunion last week. It was the biggest event of the book tour. It was just incredible. It was back in Newport, Rhode Island, and 14 of the original crew flew in from around the world for it, and many of us hadn't seen each other for 2 decades, and that's 14, and I only got in touch with 22 for the book, so that's a great number of people who are busy with their lives. And John Allen, who's John in this, he flew from Spain. He lives in Spain now.
Wow.
I mean, that was just great for him to come. And Andy, who's the second officer in this, he asked me, because he's like, I really like your book, but I'm unhappy about the way you wrote about some people. And I told him, I said, I think you missed the book, Andy. I'm not, I tell you how I feel about the people in this book, but really it's more a criticism of myself because I was unfairly judgmental of everyone at the beginning. And I'll still judge people today, don't get me wrong. But I learned that when it really counted, when we were in those hard moments, that differences didn't matter. Like Dwight, as much as I can't stand him, when things were horrible, he was excellent at what he did, and I cherish the fact that he was on this trip. But we don't have to like each other. But I have a lot of respect for what he brought to the table, and and it was an opportunity for me to express to Andy that this is a criticism of me, like being unfair to people like Dwight at the beginning of the book, and at the end, sort of understanding that differences really don't matter, and maybe we don't need to be so harsh on each other.
Did Dwight show up at Newport?
No. Dwight is he's a little upset about how he's been written into the book, so I can't fault him for that.
Well,
Did you
the
have an
next
engine on the
edition,
ship? Was there an engine?
Yes,
You
yes.
did have an engine.
Yeah, we did have engines on the ship because a requirement of today's maritime safety, especially because it was a sail education.
They're fine when they're working. Yeah.
So they were great when they were working, and really scary when they didn't work.
One thing that bothers me in the film, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's I think the last shot in the film where Crow is in the rigging and the ship is going off, or it was after a battle or something, and you can see all this prop wash coming off. They must have had the engines running or something, because a boat under sail does not have prop wash coming off.
Well,
Oops.
I wasn't there for shooting that scene, but the wake of the ship, even with the engines off, it still got the propellers creating drag in the water. So
Yeah.
there was probably an accentuated prop wash there. So I definitely won't fault that at all. And as a sailor, it is so painful to watch sailing scenes in movies. I mean, when Robert Redford did All Is Lost or whatever,
That scene.
I almost wrote him a letter saying, please, the next time you're going to make a movie about sailing, I'll consult for free. But and I love Robert Redford, and I love his movies, but my goodness.
Interesting.
I think,
There was I don't know if anybody has watched the documentary on how they made the movie, but it's a great. This book is a great segue into the documentary, which takes this boat from San Diego into the filming. But in Mexico, they built a replica of this boat with the sides off, and it was on the horizon line. It was all on hydraulics, so they can do all the scenes, the interior scenes, in a replica boat, and it was built in like Ensenada or something.
Yeah, we did. We built a full-scale replica of the ship that they shot, and the tank that they shot Titanic in. So, and the actual ship was used only for the distance scene. So like that one where Russell Crowe's at the top of the rig, at the beginning where the ship is sailing at night, where the film opens. To take where you're going, but one of my favorite things, I guess a lot of favorite things about writing this book, is Peter Weir's help. Peter was the director, and for those who don't know, Peter Weir directed Dead Poets Society, The Truman Show. Like, he's a really incredible director. And, well, not being one who's intimidated by, people, I thought, well, now I've gotten signed by a publisher, I'm going to reach out to Peter Weir and tell him about my project. So I look up was IMDb Pro, and I like send emails out to all these attorneys saying I'm
Yeah.
trying to get in touch with Peter Weir. I think a month or two goes by, and then I come in from racing my sailboat in Marina Del Rey, and there's an email that says, "Greetings from Sydney. I hear you're trying to find me." And so we have a couple emails back and forth, and we have this phone call eventually. And Peter starts off with saying, "You know, I would never normally ever respond to any requests like this. Really, I wouldn't. But inside of me, there is something that tells me I am supposed to help you. So what can I do to help you?"
Wow.
Wow.
And we had a series of phone calls, and I got to tell you, he is one of the kindest men I have ever spoken with. And it was like having this incredible professor working with you who was willing to just answer any question and be like, this didn't benefit him at all. He was on the other side of the world. He's 81 now, and he's retired and living with his, enjoying his time with his family. And we had this very profound conversation at the beginning where we spent an hour talking about what it takes. What is a hero? Who is a hero? Because he made a movie called Fearless, starring Jeff Bridges.
Yeah.
And it's about surviving an airplane crash. So for his research for that movie, he went around the country and visited all these sort of like support survival groups, where he sat there and listened to people talk about their experiences. And we kind of just having that opportunity to sort of talk about the theology of character development in people and humans and their
Wow.
interactions. And I think that'll take me back to this, which is this is not a book about sailing. This is a book about people, how
Yeah.
we treat each other, what happens. But I'm happy because we're planning a trip to Australia next year, and so I'm slated to have
Yes,
dinner
sir.
with Peter, and I can't
Nice.
wait to do that.
Wow.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, obviously, he looks like he loved the book, and as a first-time author, and going through this with him, when he did that, how did that make you feel?
It was wonderful because, again, like I said, I mean, he really. I've had a couple of people ask me about, I'm a first-time author, and I've had some people sort of question me and like, how much help did you really get? Like, how much help did you get? And I'll say, so my editor is this incredible man. His name is Jameson Stoltz, and he's the editorial director of Abrams Press. And he is as important to me as all the crew members on the ship. He signed this book right away, and he worked so closely with me. And it's wonderful because he's not just one of his editors. It wasn't assigned. He wanted this to be his project. And I bring this up because Jameson and Peter both were like, these, professors or coaches. They didn't write anything for me, but they were really available to talk to me about what I was writing, give me honest feedback. I mean, I don't, some of you have been to. I did a presentation at the Maritime Museum in April, and one of the best things about the story is that 3 of us had camcorders on board. I mean, that's how far back this was, before iPhones, right? And like an actual video camera. And so I have over 8 hours of footage, the big storm, the dismasting, and that really helped also with the accuracy of the story. But when I was putting together that presentation, I'm really proud of it because it's really, again, I had Peter standing over my shoulder, sort of a sense. And Peter was great with the book. He said to me, Will, when I made a movie and I got down to editing, I can't tell you how important it is to cut every 2 seconds out that you can. You wouldn't believe how terrible that can make a movie. And that happened here with the book and also my film presentation, really getting down to, oh my God, this clip is 1 or 2 seconds too long. Or actually, did I really need to write that sentence? Was that the right? Am I just saying that because I want to say it, or does it really benefit the reader? Should it be here or should it not be here?
I was there, and your presentation was great. It got me to buy the book. But I had a question, though, because when I was reading through this, and I had glanced at the end, which the last chapter is called 17 Years Later, so I know it had been a time had passed since this great voyage. And yet, as you're going through, you're saying the temperature was such and such, and the winds were such and such, and I'm thinking, okay, he's a creative writer. He can't remember that from. But would that have been recorded in?
That was on
Captain
the, that
Billy's
was
log?
that was on the logbook.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's where I have that information from the logbook, and then also we're very lucky today. There's a scene in the book where I talk about seeing a rocket go across the horizon
Yes.
at night,
Yes.
and one of the crew members, his name was Mandrew, and I remember vividly when it happened. But he was in high school when he did this journey, and so he was required to create, maintain a journal as part of making up for not being in school. And so he gave me his journal for this book, and in the journal he had entered when the rocket happened. So I went to NASA's logs for when they launched their rockets, and I was able to corroborate what rocket that was, and that's how I was able to say exactly what it was, why we saw it when we did. And that was so much fun with this book, doing that kind of in-depth research
Well, I can tell there's a bunch of sailors here. I'm not. But I happened to go to this presentation, and therefore I read the book. And there's a lot of stuff in here I have no idea what he's talking about. Okay, but that has to do with the structure of this ship and the functioning of it and all that. But he's a great storyteller too. And he tells the story of this incredible voyage and what they went through. I think they were crazy, actually, that time in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine. He's a great storyteller. He really makes you want to turn the page.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
What's your next book going to be? Yeah.
So I've gotten a soft green light from my publisher on it. My next book, the working title is Hands On, and it's about the lost art of apprenticeship in America. I think that practical experience is really important. So I'm doing research right now on different sort of very diverse careers. I'm studying actually tattoo artists, believe it or not, because you can't just say you want to be a tattoo artist and start tattooing people. You've got to really prove yourself. But I think going back to what I was talking about earlier is we have a bit of a crisis going on. I think there's a wonderful opportunity in the trades. And don't get me wrong, again, I'm going to go back to, like, we need doctors, we need engineers. College is very important. I'm not under, architects. But I think also that we are at a wonderful time where if someone wants to become an electrician or a plumber, they can be an apprentice, and in 4 years' time, they'll be making six figures, have a ton of practical experience, and be forever useful in whatever society they live in. And I also think that the trades are sort of a sector of careers that will be impacted very little by artificial intelligence, which is a looming threat right now for a lot of careers.
Wow.
So I think I'm excited. It's kind of cool to get to take what I've learned from this and have Abrams now. When I came up with this, I had to work on it for 2 years before I had my literary agent and before I had Abrams. And now Abrams and my literary agent, they are part of my team, and together I'm excited to see what we're going to be able to put together for everyone with this next book.
Sounds like a nice project.
Well, while we look forward to that one, Will, please enjoy your continued success for All Hands on Deck, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you,
having
Will
me.
Sofrin.
I have a question.